It's with great pleasure that I am introducing today's speaker, Pat Miller, who is a friend of mine, and she's also a native Chicagoan. And I understand that her interest in birds came from a trip to Antarctica in 1993, where she discovered that she really liked looking at birds. And then she became an avid bird watcher after that, spending all kinds of weekends and field trips on her own, and then taking trips around the United States and to a lot of exotic locations. And I'm going to read them off because they're just marvelous. Ecuador, the Galapagos, Patagonia, the Falkland Islands, South Africa, Tanzania, Greenland, Antarctica, Canada, and Attu, which is the westernmost Aleutian Island. And then from 2014 to 2020, she was on the board of the Chicago Audubon Society, and she planned their biennial Birding America conference. And then she was in charge of something called, maybe she'll tell us about it, Camping with the Birds event. That sounds kind of really fun. And then from 2002, Pat's been a volunteer docent at the Field Museum, giving public lectures on the North American bird halls on Saturdays. So I don't know if you started tours again, Pat, but in our, not quite yet, huh? But you're looking forward to it.
No, I'll say a bit about that at the end.
Yeah, and so we welcome her to share with us a little bit of that tour of the Field Museum North American Bird Hall. So please welcome.
Thanks, Rita. I'm gonna, hopefully this will work this time. Can y'all see that?
Yay!
Yay! All right. So this basically is my bird hall tour in the same order, looking at the same stuff. So let's go through it. So first of all, why is this not scrolling? Here we go. So first of all, I usually tell people a little about the bird collection at the Field Museum. So we have the 4th largest collection of birds in the world. And if you're curious, the other 3 are the British Museum, the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and the Smithsonian. We have well over 500,000 specimens, and over 1,000 of those are on display in the museum. And there are several different places where you can see birds in the museum, but the main area is what's now called the Pritzker Hall of Birds. Is it Pritzker? I'm not sure that's right. Hall of Birds, which is birds. The first part is birds of North America, and the back part is the birds of the world. So a lot of that collection is what we call study skins. So you take a dead bird and you take the innards out, you stuff it with cotton, and it kind of lays flat, and you store it that way. But we also have 100,000 skeletons, 25,000 sets of eggs, and about 1,000 nests. So it's a very extensive collection and an important one. So we're going to look at selected birds from the approximately 900 species of birds that exist in North America. And we're going to talk about how the way birds look and how they behave are related to how they live. So they're feeding, attracting mates, nesting and raising chicks, migration, and just basic survival. So, sorry, my mouse is acting up. So we're going to look at 7 different museum cases. So we're going to look at long-legged wading birds, ptarmigans and grouse, birds of prey, gulls and terns, alcids, owls, and woodpeckers. So this is the first case we look at here. This is the long-legged wading birds, and I want to show you this just to show you what the cases look like. So this is the Field Museum is sort of a traditional, beautiful, wood and glass natural history display with taxidermied specimens. But I don't, if I only showed you these 7 cases, you wouldn't really be able to see what's going on. So instead, most of what we're going to be looking at are stock photos I found on the internet that you'll much more easily be able to see the birds. So like this beautiful great blue heron here, which is probably the most common long-legged wading bird in North America. But we're going to look at, well, first of all, we're going to talk about, let me just take it one step back. So we put birds that are similar to one another in the case together. So sort of like a 3-dimensional field guide. And in this case, these are all long-legged wading birds. And if you have long legs, you have to have a long neck and a long beak so you could reach the ground or the water to find food. So we're going to look more closely at ibises, roseate spoonbill, snowy egret, and we're going to mention a bit the great egret, little tiny guy here called the green heron, American bittern, and then come back to the flamingo. So let's take a look at this first group. So all these birds have long necks and long beaks, but they also, some of them have really interesting behavior related to how they feed. So if you look at the glossy ibis here, ibises have these long curved beaks, and they're pretty much hunting by touch rather than by sight. So they poke around in the water and the mud, and they'll feel when they come upon a shrimp or something that they want to eat, and then they can grab it. And that's also true of this spoonbill here, but it sweeps its beak back and forth in the water, but it's also looking for food by touch. And unfortunately, we don't have any of these in Chicago. You'd have to go to Florida or Texas or someplace to see them. And then the snowy egret is very similar to the great egret. It's smaller, but if you don't see them side by side, it's hard to tell by size. But there are 2 things that make them different. First of all, the snowy egret has a black beak and the great egret has a yellow one. But the easiest way to tell is the snowy egret has these yellow feet, which birdwatchers call golden slippers. And it will stand in shallow water and swirl a foot around. And we don't know if the fish scares the fish or attracts the fish, but in any case, it makes the fish move, and he sees them and he can grab the fish. This is one of the most common herons in the Chicago area. In fact, if you ever go to, let's see, the northeast corner of North Pond in Lincoln Park, half of the year, at least spring through fall, you can almost guaranteed to see a green heron there. The green heron has really interesting behavior where it will take a seed or a piece of a leaf or something and drop it on the surface of the water and then sort of hover and wait. And the fish come up to investigate it, and then the heron can grab the fish. This is a really interesting bird called the American bittern. This is a bird that lives in swamps and marshlands and places like that. And you can see how its brown plumage would be fantastic camouflage in those situations. But it also has this unique thing where it can stretch its neck really long. So you can see in this middle picture how far it can stretch its neck. And it's a very shy bird. So when it doesn't want to be seen, it'll fly into the phragmites or cattails or whatever, and stand still and stretch its neck straight up in the air, and it's almost impossible to see. So there's an American bittern in here. You can see it's right there. But it's really, really tough to see when it doesn't want to be seen. And then the flamingos are among the strangest birds in the world for a number of reasons. First of all, we have one flamingo in North America, it's the American flamingo. These are actually South American flamingos, but these pictures did the best job of illustrating what I want to say about flamingos. So flamingos are this strange mixture of characteristics. They have waterproof feathers like a duck or a goose, which is not true of any of these other long-legged wading birds. And they, if you hear them call, they kind of sound like a goose. And they have completely webbed feet, which you can see on this picture here. And all these other guys have just a little tiny bit of webbing in their feet. But the strangest thing about them is their beak. And this is one of the best photographs of a flamingo beak I've seen. Beak is unusual because they eat with their heads upside down, like in this picture here. So unlike most animals like us, and if you grab your thumb and then you put your hand upside down, grab your thumb and flap your fingers up, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So unlike most animals, the flamingo's lower jaw is fixed and its upper jaw is what moves because of the position it eats in. It also has little ridges along the edge of its beak, and it has an enormous tongue. Almost this entire space inside its beak is filled up with its tongue. So it puts its head upside down in the water, brings in a mouthful of water, uses its powerful tongue to push the water down its, amazingly skinny neck, and that's how it is able to eat. It's very strange. There's a genetic study that's been going on at the Field Museum and other places for quite a while now, called Early Bird, and they're trying to map the genetic relationships across all the roughly 10,000 or 11,000 birds that exist in the world. And one of the things people are most interested to nail down is who is the flamingo related to, because it's just this really bizarre combination of characteristics. Does anybody have any questions about the long-legged wading birds?
Do the flamingos, what do they do to keep them warm in the winter?
Well, they're not they're not anywhere where it's cold.
I see them in the zoo.
Well, in the zoo, yeah, I don't know. I don't think they spend much time outside in the zoo, but in the wild, they don't really live any place where it ever gets cold.
I thought that depending on what the flamingo eats, their color is affected.
That is true. They are pink because of what they eat. They eat shrimp and pink colored algae, and that is why they are pink. That is true. In fact, some of my friends who work in the museum, they joke that every now and then they have to open up the flamingo case and get a pink magic marker and touch up the feathers. But yes, that is true. It's because of what they eat is why they're pink. Okay, so now we're going to walk across the hall to look at the ptarmigans and grouse. So I don't know if too many people have even heard of ptarmigans. Ptarmigans are birds that live in high latitudes. So you'd find them, around the Arctic. We have them, I mean, you find them like in Canada, Alaska, Scandinavia, Russia, places like that. And their ptarmigans are famous because they molt their feathers 3 times a year, and most birds only molt their feathers once or twice a year. So why do birds molt their feathers at all? The main reason is that you need to have new feathers every year to fly, because your feathers wear out, and to stay warm. Birds that have to attract a new mate every year go through a second molt, where the males in particular get these bright, what's called breeding plumage. And you've seen, beautiful, lots of different kinds of birds, but, warblers and ducks and all kinds of birds. The males in particular, because it's the males who are trying to attract a female. The females have a lot of power in the bird world. They're the ones who choose the mate. But for ptarmigans, it's all about camouflage. So if you think about where they live, they're living, in a very cold place, and they're they have lots of pretty fierce predators like snowy owls and Arctic foxes, and so camouflage is very important for them. So so I'm this photograph on the left, I took this from the museum because it does the best job I could find of showing what I want to mention here. So if you look down on the bottom here, these three white birds, these are a willow, a rock, and a white-tailed ptarmigan. And you can see they're almost entirely white. And that makes sense because that's their winter plumage. So they're very highly camouflaged in the snow. In the summertime, they're in the rocks or the tundra, and they're completely brown. And this photograph here is really hard to see, but there are two rock ptarmigans here. There's one and there's the second one. And then in the spring, they go through this third molt where they're partly brown and partly white. And these are the same three birds, the willow rock and white-tailed ptarmigan, but in their spring plumage. Another thing that's cool about ptarmigans, you can see it really well on this photograph of a willow ptarmigan foot. In the wintertime, they grow their claws really long and they get feathers on their feet, which so that kind of acts as a snowshoe so they don't sink down into the snow, and it helps to keep their feet warm. Ptarmigans are similar to grouse. Grouse are birds, large birds that live in grasslands and prairies and lower elevations in the mountains in the west, mostly in the west. We have a few prairie chickens here, but male grouse are famous because they go through these. So normally, if you just see them, they're very dull brown, good camouflage for those types of environments. But when they're trying to attract a mate, they show these very distinctive features and they make noises. So here's some sage grouse. On the left, you can see their tail feathers are all spread out like a fan, and they have these sacs on their necks that almost look like fur. And then this is the greater prairie chicken who does what's called booming. So in addition to the dancing that they do and the physical characteristics, which in this case are, bright yellow air sacs that you only see when he's booming, he makes a noise to attract a mate. And here's an example of a ruffed grouse doing what's called drumming. So this bird will stand on a hollow log and he beats his feather, his wings hundreds of times a second to make a noise. And he stands on the hollow log because it makes the sound louder. And at the Field Museum, we have throughout the museum some buttons, like you can see here on the right, that play these sounds. So this is the booming, and this is the drumming. And we have other fun ones, like we have a loon, and in the birds of the world, we have a kookaburra, which is really hilarious. So I was trying to put videos of the prairie chicken and the ruffed grouse doing these things into this presentation, and we couldn't quite figure out how to make it work. So Barbara's going to send you a link to two videos, one on YouTube and one on Vimeo. They're very, very short. One's 17 seconds and one's 26 seconds. But if you have nothing better to do, I highly recommend that you watch them. They're really pretty cool. So the males dance around in these dancing grounds. The females decide who they want to mate with. They do that, and then the female goes off, and the males are completely off the hook. And the female does everything. She builds the nest, she broods the eggs, and she takes care of the chicks. So when the chick is born, it's born like this picture here on the right, in a state that's called precocial. So you've heard the word precocious. That's where there's pretty much the same word. A songbird, like a robin or a warbler, the chicks are born, they're totally blind. naked. They can't see. They're completely helpless, and it requires two parents to take care of a chick like that. But with the grouse, because there's only one parent, they come out of the egg and they can kind of run around. They have feathers. They can see. They can walk around. They can kind of look after themselves a little bit. So, any questions about ptarmigans or grouse before we move on?
Well, I just wanted to say, if you haven't watched the Netflix Dancing with Birds, it's a fascinating documentary. I had no idea that male birds could show the plumage and the colors and the crazy antics, all to attract a female.
Yep. I have not seen that, but I'm going to go watch it as soon as we're
Oh,
done
it's
here.
wonderful.
I bet. Okay, well, the next thing we're going to do, we're walk to our right, and we're going to look at birds of prey. And everybody loves birds of prey because, you know, they're large and kind of exciting. We're going to start with these two here on the left. So these are called sharp-shinned hawks. They're in a family of hawks that are called accipiters, which are forest hawks. They have narrow wings so they can maneuver through trees when they're flying. But these two birds are the same species, but one of them is twice as big as the other one. And unlike most animals, it's the female that's larger in birds of prey, and that includes owls too. Well, why is that? Well, the answer is, of course, we don't really know, but there's a couple ideas about that. Hawks lay really large eggs relative to their body size, so she needs to be big to carry the egg. It may help protect her when she's mating because her mate has sharp beak and sharp talons. And it may be that the female and the male are such different sizes because it allows them to go after different prey, so they're not competing with each other for food on their territory. And if you care about things like that, it's called reverse sexual size dimorphism. And everybody, of course, loves our two North American eagles, the golden eagle and the bald eagle on the right here. And very often people say, well, which is bigger? And these are, by the way, both of these pictures are from the Field Museum Bird Hall. Well, the answer of which is bigger is the female. So this is almost certainly a female golden eagle, and this is almost certainly a male bald eagle. And if they were the same sex, they'd pretty much be the same size. This is a really cool bird called the snail kite, and you pretty much have to go to the Everglades to see this bird. They are, in fact, I could tell you exactly where to see them in the Everglades. They are highly endangered because they have physical characteristics because they only eat one thing. They have an extremely specialized diet, unlike the gulls we're going to look at in just a bit. So if you look at this bird here on the left, look at how curved its beak is. And if you look at the one on the right, look at how curved its talons are. Well, that's because it only eats this one thing, which is this really large snail called an apple snail. You can see this one eating one here on the right.
Ooh.
So it all of a sudden, now, because of the environmental problems in the Everglades, the apple snails are disappearing. And so the snail kite's highly endangered. I mean, one of the most endangered birds in our country. And it can't all of a sudden start hunting rodents or other birds because it's built to pull a snail out of the snail shell and nothing else. So here's an example of where having a specialized diet has turned out to be a pretty precarious strategy for survival. Next, we're going to look at vultures. And vultures aren't really birds of prey. They're carrion eaters rather than hunters, although I'll mention something about that in a second. But so vultures are actually do us all great service. They clean up a lot of the dead animals, including roadkill that you'll see, like anywhere. So the most common one is the turkey vulture, which is the one on the left. So if you, very often you'll be driving down the highway and you'll see a big bird in the sky flying with its wings in a V. And it kind of flies tippy. It flies kind of tippy, so it moves back and forth. And that's the turkey vulture. And here's a picture of vultures are pretty ugly. In fact, if you ever seen an Andean condor, which is a type of vulture, that's pretty much the ugliest bird in the world. But there's a picture of a male adult turkey vulture who's looking pretty good, I think. He looks like something out of Game of Thrones to me. And then here's the black vulture on the right. So black vultures are birds, are southern birds. And they used to not be seen in Illinois at all. And the way you tell them apart is obviously it's the under from the wings. The black vulture has a silver tip, and the turkey vulture, the whole wing is silver on the edge. But probably because of climate change, black vultures are starting to venture into Illinois more and more. And in fact, there was an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about farmers in Illinois being concerned that black vultures are preying on newborn lambs and newborn calves. No one has actually proved that that's true, but because it's unusual for vultures to eat live prey because they don't need to. There's plenty of dead stuff for them, but it'd be interesting to see whatever happens with that story. But in any case, you're much more likely to see a black vulture, not in Chicago yet, but farther south in Illinois, much more likely to see them than just a few years ago. And then the last bird I want to talk about is the peregrine falcon. So peregrine falcons are another endangered species, but this is actually a much happier story. So you may know that in the 1940s, populations of peregrine falcons in particular, but other birds of prey, including eagles and other hawks and owls, began to really drop substantially because of DDT, which is a pesticide that gets into the animals that these birds would eat. So in 1972, DDT was banned. And because of that and a lot of conservation work, peregrine falcons have come back to the point where they're no longer endangered. They're still threatened, but they're doing really well. One of the ways, and what was happening with the DDT is something about the DDT was making the eggshells thinner. So the bird would sit on the egg and the egg would break, and that egg was never gonna hatch. And one of the ways they could prove that was true is by looking at egg collections like ours and measuring the thickness of the eggshells and proving that yes, they've gotten much thinner over time. So there's a good example of the value of having 100 and I don't know at this point 130 years worth of bird specimens in our collection. So here's a peregrine. Here's a beautiful male peregrine. We have peregrines, quite a few peregrine pairs nesting in and around Chicago. I think this year it's about 30. And there's a woman named Murre at the Field Museum. She's an ornithologist there, and she's in charge of the peregrine recovery program. So every spring she goes out. They live on skyscrapers, basically. It's very similar to the cliff tops that they like in the wild. And so she'll go out, put on a harness and a hard hat and take blood from the chicks and ban the chicks while the parents are dive bombing her, so we can keep track of these individual birds because they're still threatened, and it's important that we know how they're doing, but also to see where they're dispersing to. So that's been an extremely successful program, including especially here in Chicago. Anything about birds of prey?
Wait, one thing, Pat, Are the
Yeah.
falcons the ones that are used? People would raise falcons to hunt. Is that the bird that they would?
Yes, yes. Not just falcons are the most common ones, and peregrines are the sort of the creme de la creme of the hunting falcons. But there are other falcons like Merlins and European falcons that are used for that as well. But other hawks are used for that. So red-tailed hawks and swains and hawks are also used for hunting. But yes, falconers use falcons. But primarily falcons, but other hawks as well.
Is it true that peregrine falcons are responsible for a lot of small birds disappearing from Hyde Park? It's what you hear on Hyde Park Neighbors or the Hyde Park Heralds, that starlings and grackles and all kinds of small birds have simply disappeared. Ones I used to see in my backyard or front yard that I don't see anymore.
We don't have that many peregrine falcons. Peregrine falcons are bird killers. That's what they eat. They eat other birds. But it's I think you might want to look to climate change and other things. There's not enough peregrine falcons in all of Chicago to make a dent in the bird population. They don't eat that many birds.
I once had two of them land on electric lines, whatever they were for, cable or phone, in my backyard, a pair, because my neighbor 2 doors down keeps chickens. But so they stayed there for quite a while until they found the chickens were in cages and they couldn't have them for lunch.
That's possible. One time in a wildlife refuge in New Jersey, I saw a peregrine take out a snow goose, which was bigger than it is, but it flew into this gigantic flock of snow geese and it found one, and they first of all, they fly up kind of high and then they stoop at 200 miles an hour. They're the fastest animal on earth when they're stooping, and they have an extra little thing on their beak, so they hit the bird in the back of the neck and break their neck. So the bird's basically dead at that point, and then they can do what they want with it. But yeah, it's possible a peregrine would be interested in a chicken, but I would not blame the peregrines for the loss of songbirds. There's a lot of other stuff going on with that.
Which one is the one that's a sport? Is that the falcon?
Well, yeah. But it's not just the peregrine. There's lots of other falcons and other hawks that are used for falconry as well.
I guess, do birds have to fly? It's like the chicken. Now that's not considered a bird.
A chicken is definitely a bird.
Well, has anyone labeled them or studied them?
Studied chickens?
Yeah. Besides
Yeah,
eating.
sure. Yeah, sure. A lot of people study chickens. In fact, chicken breeding, I don't know that much about it, but chicken breeding is like a science. There's all these different breeds, and this is like, all this serious look at breeding different. It's like dogs. Chickens are almost like dogs. There's been lots of serious attention paid to
breeding.
Yeah, and scientists, like people at the Field Museum, tend to focus more on wild birds. But I'll tell you a little quick story. So I don't know if you remember the Brown's chicken restaurant murders back
Yes.
in, 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. So one of my friends who works at the museum was called in to testify at the trial. So they found the remains of a chicken meal in the garbage, and they collected it and they used the DNA to identify the murderer. And so my friend was called in to identify the meal as being a chicken. All kinds of crazy stuff people get asked to do.
Are there a lot of birds that they haven't found yet?
Well, that's a question. That's the question. There are every now and then new birds are found in the wild. I'm sure there are a few birds that we haven't seen. Probably, you know, many birds that we haven't seen, but not that many. So, because birds are pretty obvious, but you know, new mammals are found all the time. Insects are found. New insects are found all the time, but new birds is pretty unusual to find in the wild. What is happening is that people, especially with DNA now, people are finding new species of birds in museums. So people look at two 50-year-old specimens of a bird and say, these don't really look quite the same. There's something different about them. And they'll do a DNA analysis and they may decide that they're separate species. Now this drives bird watchers crazy because bird watchers like to keep lists of what they're seeing, and then all of a sudden what you saw, you're not sure which of the two new species it was. So it kind of drives bird watchers a little nuts, but it's a fascinating process. It's called splitting, and it's happening. So we used to think there were about 10,000 species of birds. Now it's more than that, and probably end up being about 11,000 before we're done.
But my husband and I have gotten into watching nature shows on Saturday afternoons, mostly from BBC. But this last weekend, we watched one narrated by David Attenborough on hummingbirds.
Oh yeah.
And of course, it's because of the speed cameras. They can now photograph them so that you could see them.
Yes.
And it was fascinating, an hour about hummingbirds. There are lots of different kinds and different beaks, and it was amazing.
Yeah, hummingbirds are really cool. And if you look videos of them flying and slow down and see how fast they're really moving those wings.
Yes.
It's astonishing. The best hummingbirds are in South America. We have most of the hummingbird species in North America are in the West. We only have one species here east of the Mississippi, which is the ruby-throated hummingbird. They're not that hard to see. They're pretty easy to see in the spring, especially in the spring, summer. If you put out, one of those hummingbird feeders, you'll get them. But I don't do hummingbirds on my tour because I tend to focus on larger birds because it's easier if I've got a crowd of 12 people to show them larger birds. So I love hummingbirds though.
There was a bird found in Arkansas that hadn't been seen in years.
Yes, the ivory-billed woodpecker. I could talk about that when we get to the woodpeckers.
Well, they found more.
No, they did not.
Now, a friend of mine sent me pictures of other ones that they had seen.
Well, I'd love to see that.
If I can, I'll get
a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people see pileated woodpeckers. Something through ivory bills. You're talking about a woodpecker, right?
I don't know what it was, but I'll find out and let you know.
Okay, yeah, that's highly unlikely. Okay, let's move on. All right, gulls. So gulls are seabirds. They're very common in cities and inland because they eat everything. So this bird here on the left is called the ring-billed gull. And this is probably the most common bird in Chicago. And if you walk, I tell visitors when you step outside the museum, it'll take you, 10 seconds to see a ring-billed gull. This is an adult. But the gulls tend to go through different plumages as they're growing up. So a first-year bird would be completely just mottled gray, and then they get more and more close to this 4-year plus adult plumage. And this is a herring gull, which is another bird we have in Chicago. One of the things that's cool about this bird and other large birds is you could kind of hard to see, but there's a red spot on the bottom of its beak. And that's a target spot for its chick. So the chick will tap the parent on the beak, and that triggers a regurgitation response. That's how they feed their young. Terns are related to gulls. They're smaller seabirds. They're really cool birds. They're really beautiful. They're lightweight. They're incredible flyers. They can hover over water and then dive for a fish. It's pretty easy to see some terns in around Navy Pier and occasionally in North Pond. Caspian terns is what they're called. They're pretty big and they have bright red beaks. This is an Arctic tern, this one in the picture here on the left. This is one of the really fascinating bird. We don't have these in Chicago, obviously, but Arctic terns make the longest migration of any animal on Earth. So every year they fly from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back. And you can see on this map, the yellow route is the north to south. So this is our summer. They're going down here for the southern summer, and then when it gets to be winter in the Antarctic, they go back up north. Well, one time I asked the visitor why he thought they flew so far for their migration, and he said for the frequent flyer miles, which I thought was a pretty good joke. So I stole it. But the real answer probably is that they're following food, and they like to feed all day. And so if it's light out all day, like it's light in the Arctic 24 hours a day in our summer, and it's light in the Antarctic in their summer, then they can feed anytime they want to. So that's probably what's going on with the terns. But they're flying. I used to say they flew about 30,000 miles round trip every year, but they put some radio trackers on these birds, and because they're zigzagging around, it turns out they're really flying more like 40,000 miles round trip every year. So now we're going to move on to the owlsets, and I'm showing you this case on the left here simply because it's my #1 favorite case in the entire museum. I love these birds. Hang on a sec. I gotta take some water.
Yes.
These are birds of northern oceans, and sometimes people, come over and say, "Oh, look at the penguins." Well, these aren't penguins. They live in the north, and penguins only live from the equator south, but they're very similar to penguins. They've got the upright stance. They've got the black and white plumage. So you can, and they basically inhabit the same ecological niche that penguins do, but in the north. Pardon me. So they live in these crowded cliffs, like you can see right here in the middle of this picture. And probably the one you're most familiar with are puffins. So there's a picture of puffins here on the right. They have these beautiful beaks that they use for courtship displays. And this is the Atlantic puffin, which is the only one we have in the Atlantic. There's more different types of puffins in the Pacific. So I showed you that they live in crowded colonies on these really narrow cliff edges, and that's affected their eggs. So the bird on the left here is a common murre, and these are common murre eggs. All 4 of these are the same species. And there are 2 things that are weird about these eggs. And I always ask visitors what are the 2 weird things, and they always get it right. So the first thing is their shape is weird. It's kind of cone shaped instead of chicken egg shaped. But also there's a huge variety of coloring and patterns on these eggs. and you'll anything from almost pure white to really, really dark, speckled black. So the reason we think they're cone shaped is because if you're living on these crowded cliff edges, your neighbor comes in for a landing and he knocks your egg, it's more likely to spin in a circle if it's in this cone shape. And we think the speckled coloring helps the parent find its own egg because, there are thousands of birds in these colonies. This bird over here on the right is a great auk, and this bird's been extinct since the 1840s. It was basically due to hunting. So we know exactly when it went extinct, actually. And our specimen in the museum is actually the one we have on display is actually a replica, but we do have a real one that we keep up in the bird collection. There's actually, everybody knows where every single full or partial specimen of great auks is. Real quickly, owls. Owls are, as you know, nocturnal hunters. They have soft flight feathers to help them approach their prey. Here's some owls that are, the first two are fairly common in Chicago. Long-eared owl is my favorite owl. You can actually see these in Grant Park. These are not really ears, they're just feathers, but obviously they call them long-eared owls because of that. Here's a little bird called the saw-whet owl, which is also pretty easy to find in Chicago. And this is the snowy owl on the right, which is an Arctic bird, but lately there have been what are called eruptions of snowy owls, which means they're coming down from the Arctic and they're spreading out into areas that are south of where they're normally found. And that's been happening a lot in the past 10 years or so. In fact, there was one time, Belly, about 5 years ago, when there were 8 snowy owls in Lincoln Park, or I'm sorry, at Montrose Harbor, all together on the same day. It was pretty wild. The good news is we think they're dispersing because they're doing well, because they're more young owls survive their early childhood than normal, and so there's not enough food for everybody, so the young ones spread out and spread out into other areas. So it's actually kind of a good thing if we see them spreading out into different places. And then the last thing are the woodpeckers. So here are 5 species of woodpeckers that are very common in Chicago. The northern flicker over here on the left. Ours is a subspecies called a yellow shafted, which has the tail, inner tail feathers would be golden instead of red. But so the best picture I could find that would fit into the space here. I love this bird. It's just a beautiful bird, and they're very common. This is a downy woodpecker, black and white one. It's smaller than a very similar bird called the hairy woodpecker, and you can tell them that, and the hairy woodpecker has a larger beak, but otherwise you pretty much tell them apart by size and by their call. Here's a red-bellied woodpecker, and you're probably thinking, well, why is he called? I don't see much red on his belly. Why is he called a red-bellied woodpecker? His head is red. There's a little bit of a pink wash on his belly. Well, the answer to the question is because this guy here is called the red-headed woodpecker, and his head is completely red. And I've seen these birds very often in Grant Park, and also in Jackson Park. So they're pretty beautiful birds to see. And then this is on the last one is a yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a woodpecker. And there's a place near the Art Institute near Columbus Street or Avenue, whatever it is, called Sapsucker Grove, where there was a grove of trees that are just packed with little marks of these guys drilling into the trees to suck the sap out of them. It's pretty cool. It's a good place to find them. These birds migrate early in the spring, so April is a good time for sapsuckers. And then here are some other birds I want to talk about, the woodpeckers. So woodpeckers drill on trees for communication. So they would tell their mate they're in the neighborhood, tell their enemies to stay away. They have to drill into trees to pull out the insects and insect larvae that make up their food. And they use them for nest building. So if you look over here on the left, this is another photo from a detail in the museum. This is a cavity nest for a blackback woodpecker, which is a western species. So this is when you see a woodpecker go into a dead tree. This is what they're going into. It's a cavity. It may be empty. It may have eggs. It may have chicks, depending on the time of year. So they're doing all this drilling on trees. So woodpeckers are often seen upright because they need to be upright to do that drilling on the trees. So that has influenced the evolution of their beaks, their brain cases, their tails, and their fruit. So their beaks are very, very thick and strong, and their brains have an extra large brain case to protect them, to protect the brain, like a shock absorber when they're drilling on trees. If you look at their tail, so look at this as a pileated woodpecker here. You can see it's using its tail as a brace on the tree. And so woodpeckers, that's really important. They cannot stand upright on that tree if they don't have a good strong tail. So woodpeckers molt their tail feathers differently from other birds. So most birds molt their tail feathers in pairs, and they molt the center ones first, the big center ones, and then next one's moving out, the next one's moving out. But woodpeckers molt their outer tail feathers first, and then the next one's moving in, because they can't afford to let go of those big, strong center tail feathers until they have strong outer ones to make up for them. Also, you'll look at this guy's feet here. So most birds have 4 toes, and most birds have 3 toes in the front and 1 in the back. Woodpeckers have 2 toes in the front and 2 in the back. So that extra toe is kind of moved around back to help them stay upright on the tree. This is an interesting species of woodpecker called an acorn woodpecker, which you would find in the American Southwest. And it stores acorns in hollow logs and even things like telephone poles. And it uses them. It still eats insects, but this is like their backup food source. And they found as many as 60,000 acorns in these trees that are being managed by a colony of birds. And the last thing I want to show you is, I try not to get too deep into the weeds, but this is the coolest thing I learned when I was getting ready to do this tour. So I'm going to share it with you like I do at the end of my tour with everybody else. So here's another pileated woodpecker, beautiful male. Woodpeckers have long tongues to extract insects and larvae from the trees. You can see this guy's, how long this guy's tongue is. So his head is about, I don't know, 2.5 inches with the beak, but his tongue is 5 or 6 inches long. How does he fit that tongue inside his mouth? I'm going to show you. And here's a diagram. I actually took this from the museum because this is the best example I've seen of this. So the woodpecker is able to store his groove on the top of the skull, under the skin, obviously. This is a groove here on top of the skull. So he wraps his tongue around the top of his skull, and then, so only a little bit of it is sticking out of his mouth when he's not using it. It's one of the strangest things I've ever learned about in my entire life, but it's totally cool. And
Yeah.
That's pretty much, that's it. Anything else do you want to talk about?
I want to know if birds can form relationships with animals and people, because you see so many pictures of like a bird on the top of an elephant.
Yes, they can for a number of reasons. So first of all, there's these things called oxpeckers, which, literally pick insects off of things like hippos and that's a symbiotic relationship, let's call it. But yes, birds can certain types of birds can attach themselves to humans. And I imagine with other animals, I don't know anything really about that, but there are many, many examples of birds, being attached to humans. I mean, look at parrots, for example. But they tend to be the really intelligent birds, which tend to be parrots or birds related to parrots, or what are called corvids, which are like crows and ravens.
So
Very,
the
very
term-
smart. Very smart
term-
birds.
Term bird brain is not accurate.
Bird brain is not, no, birds are not stupid.
So Pat, I had a question. Have you seen many of these birds on your bird watching trips?
Yes, I've seen almost all of them.
Wow.
I think
What's your next trip?
ask me when COVID is over.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, so let me give you, I know we're running late here. Let me give you a quick update of what's going on in the museum. So I have not given a tour of the museum since February of 2020. I've been back to the museum once to give a book to a friend who works there. They've been doing a good job keeping the volunteers, the docents and other volunteers up to date on what's happening. Right now, they're doing, we're not allowed to give our tours yet. And the way things are going, I suspect it might be a while. They are doing this sort of stationary thing where there are 10 spots in the museum where people are standing there for 2 hours, and they have some specimens or whatever, and they're there to tell you about that specimen and answer questions. I have not done that yet, just not because I'm not interested in, but because I'm super busy with other things. But I think I'm going to try and get back there in November, and I'm going to do the Peregrine Falcon station, which will be upstairs above the bird hall by the DNA lab. But I'm not there. I just haven't had time to, it just hasn't seemed urgent yet, but I'm dying to get back to do my tour, and I'll let Rita know when I do, and I hope some of you will come and actually see this in the museum for real.
Pat, thank you so much for what you've done. I have a quick question. What's your favorite bird?
Oh, that's easy. Striated caracara.
What kind of a bird?
Striated caracara is actually, I'm going to take it back. That's my second favorite bird. My favorite bird is northern gannet. Northern gannet is a seabird. There are gannets all over the world. Anywhere there's an ocean, there are gannets. I've seen them in South Africa. I've seen them in Ireland. But our northern gannet is this beautiful, big bird, and it flies out, and then it dives for fish, and they're really cool. You should look them up on the internet and see what they look like. And again, I remind you to take a look at the videos that Barbara's going to send you.
So we are over our usual ending time of 1 o'clock. If there's any last burning question, we can take one more. Otherwise, we want to thank Pat for what a wonderful presentation. It was very interesting.
Thanks.
And learned so much about birds. And I'm so glad you hung in with us, and we hung in with you so that we could get this to work for both of us. We appreciate your flexibility in terms of rescheduling.
Yes.
Well, thanks for trusting me to come back. That was the most embarrassing thing I've ever had.
It was well worth the wait.
Well worth the wait.
Could I ask one
Thank
question? Could I ask one question?
Sure, Joe.
Do
Go
it?
ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
About a year ago, I was in my living room and I heard a noise at the front window on the glass. It was an unusual sound. And I went there and I saw holding onto the rail at the bottom of where the storm window, would fit up and down, a downy woodpecker holding on right against the glass. And I thought, well, was he injured or did it? I've never heard of a bird flying into my living room window in all the decades I've lived in the house. I've seen downy woodpeckers on trees in my backyard.
Yeah.
And it stayed there for a while, and I was about a foot away, which is unusually close. You never get to see a bird that close when you're outside in nature, so to speak. And then it flew away, and it was did not appear to be injured, and this was very unusual behavior. I don't know how one would explain something like that.
I agree, it's unusual. The only thing I can think of, birds hit windows all the time, so maybe it hit the window gently, and it was a little bit stunned, but wasn't really hurt, and it just ended up sitting there until it was recovered enough to flap. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. It's very strange to have a bird on the windowsill, but birds hit windows all the time. And Chicago's, one of the pioneers, and we have this thing called Lights Out Chicago, where during the spring and the fall migration, we try and get the big buildings to turn off their lights, because birds get confused when they say lights, and we have, I don't know what the number is now, 50,000 birds in our collection that were collected around McCormick Place that crashed into the windows at McCormick Place and died. And we have Chicago Audubon and other groups have people go out around the loop and other areas early in the morning and either pick up dead birds to take to the museum or to rescue injured birds. And there's a wildlife place in Willowbrook that they will take the birds and try and make them feel better.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Very much, Pat. And we'll look forward to having you back again or hearing about when you're giving your in-person tours. Maybe some of us will show up for it. So
that'd be great. I'll let you guys know. Thanks so much. Okay.
Take care, everybody. Have a good till next time.